How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kufdalid, Daf 104 of Masechta Zevachim. Friends, okay, there is a lot. It's not okay. There's a lot going on in Kufdalid, but it's not like there's a lot going on in Kufdalid. It's not a daf where there's just like a million things, but at the same time, yeah. Anyways, I do have 5 sections here, but I don't know what to tell you. Okay, let's just jump in. We're going to learn 2 Mishnayos today. We're going to start out with Kohens receiving hides of pasul korbins, sheesh. So this continues our discussion from yesterday about the hide of an ola going to the Kohanim. The question is, what if the animal becomes... What if the korbin becomes pasul? We had learned a Mishnah yesterday that had said, right? We had learned a Mishnah yesterday that right at the outset says that if you're not going to be offering the korbin on the mizbeach because it's pasul, so then the kohen is not going to get its hide. However, we're going to discuss if maybe there are scenarios where the kohen even so does get the hide. So that's going to be a machlokes between Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, which then leads to a machlokes between Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer about Zerikas hadam for pasul korbins. Could there ever be Zerikas hadam for a pasul korbin? That is their machlokes. We will see the opinion of Hanina Sgan Hakohanim, who said that he had never saw a hide being taken out to be burnt, as in a pasul hide that there's sorry, nothing we can do with it, we got to burn it. Rabbi Hanina Sgan Hakohanim says, I never saw such a thing. We get to a new Mishnah which talks about chatases pnimios. Very interesting. Parim anestrofim, seir anestrofim. How exactly they burnt them? There's some pretty interesting things about that, about the process of burning the chatases pnimios and where they're burnt. And then the cherry on top, we conclude the daf learning about whether there is linah for inner chatases. So, wow. So yeah, that's what I don't know if I got the point across. There's a lot on this daf because there's a lot on this daf, not because there's bitty kind of things, but there's a lot of real stuff on this daf. It's Friday afternoon, 12:40 in the afternoon. Shabbos starts probably about 4 o'clock. So I got to hustle a bit to record and edit. Hopefully I'll get everything in. Yeah, the Shabbos is a good reset because as I'm sure many of you have realized, I am running a little behind on Babble on Talmud. I've only been getting the dafs up just in time for the Chevra to wake up in North America. Anyways, so hopefully this Shabbos will be a good reset. I can get this uploaded and everything before Shabbos, and then hopefully next week already I can get some level of normalcy back. Chevra, let us jump in to Daf Kuf Daled of Masechta Zevachim. Friends, we shall begin on Daf Kuf Gimel Amid Beis at the Mishnah 2, 4, 5 lines into the wide lines. And Daf Kuf Gimel Amid Beis says the Mishnah. This is going to be Gavaldik. The first section of this daf is really a lot of Kohens. The second half of the daf is actually a little bit quicker, which is good. But the first part of the daf, we're going to have to use our brains. It's going to be the best. Okay. So says the Mishnah, Kol HaKodshim she'ira b'en pasul. Okay, so if you have a korbin that becomes pasul. Kodem le'afshitan, if the pasul happens before they've been skinned, before the animal has been skinned, Eino Resein L'Kianim, so then the kohen is not going to get any hide. So if you have, let's say, a korbin ola, let's say we're talking about a korbin ola, and so that you slaughter the korbin, okay, and you haven't yet skinned it, and it becomes pasul somehow. Let's not worry about how, but it becomes pasul. Now you have a pasul korbin. The hide is still on the animal. So you're not just gonna skin the animal now to give, you have a pasul korbin. You're not gonna be like, oh wait, let's skin the animal and take the hide. No. In that case, if the korbin becomes pasul when the skin is still on, the kohanim don't get the hide. So again, if the pasul happened before the animal was skinned, the Kohen does not receive the hide. Okay, says the Mishnah, if, however, the animal was slaughtered, the animal was slaughtered, the animal was skinned, the hide was removed from the animal, and then the korban becomes pasul. So says the Mishnah, in that case, if the pasul happened when the animal was already skinned, the Kohen does receive the hide in that case. Now, this is a big question because, as we pointed out earlier, the Mishnah, I'm going to read the Mishnah from yesterday, that if the Mizbeach does not get anything from the korban, then neither does the Kohen. The Kohen is not going to get the hide. And this animal, because it's pasul, will not be offered on the Mizbeach, and yet we're saying that the Kohen does get the hide, since it became pasul after the animal was skinned. So clearly there's some explaining that we are going to have to do, because here we have a korban that it won't be burned on the Mizbeach, and yet the Kohen is getting the hide. Hanina Sgan Hakohanim says something very interesting, that even though we just talked about how there are scenarios where the Kohen doesn't get the hide, says Hanina Sgan Hakohanim, Miyomai lo ra'isi, or show to the base Asrefa. Says Hanina Sgan Hakohanim, the deputy Kohen Gadol, in my tenure, I have never seen that a hide was forfeited, was not received by the Kohen, and it was taken out to be burned. I never saw it. Okay. Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva, midvarav lamanu, says Rabbi Akiva, well, from the fact that Rabbi Hanina Sgan Hakohanim just said that in his entire tenure, he never witnessed taking out a skin to be burnt, and that it wasn't received by the Kohanim and instead was taken out to be burnt. So based on that, says Rabbi Akiva, she'amavshit es abechor v'nimtza treifa, that if you have let's assume what it means is that if you have a Kohen who was off, right, so a person had a bechor, he gave it to the Kohen. But how does bechor work? Right, it's funny, I'm learning Masechta Bechor, it says, I point out like every day these days. So, I'm assuming, bechor, everyone knows what that is. Oh boy, without getting into it too much, but if you have a person and they have let's say a Sruli, and and their sheep gives birth to it's a firstborn male sheep. So that is a bechor, right? So that animal is given to the Kohen. The Kohen then brings it to the Beis Mikdash, brings it as a korban, as a kachim kalim. So now it says Rabbi Akiva, if the Kohen, let's assume this is what it means, that if the Kohen offers the korban, skins the korban, right? Right? So the Kohen has this bechor and he's offering as a korban and he skins the animal, v'nimtza treifa, and it turns out that the animal, it's a treifa. Turns out it's a treifa. Now it was a treifa when it came into the Beis Mikdash. It was a treifa all along, and yet, also the Kohanim can get the hide, nonetheless. Because after all, says Rabbi Akiva, look, Hanina Sgan Hakohanim says he has never seen a hide being taken out to be burned rather than given to the Kohanim. So Rabbi Akiva says, look, based on that, I guess that means if you have a korban bechor, it's been skinned. You're now looking at the insides of the animal. Turns out there's a blemish that makes it a treifa. Well, apparently, as far as Rabbi Hanina Sgan Hakohanim is concerned, this would not be taken out to be burned, right? He said he's never seen it happen. So Rabbi Akiva says, okay, well, apparently then I guess you can keep it. The Chacham say, right, the Kohen can keep it. Chacham say, no way, no. How? The fact that Rabbi Hanina Sgan Hakohanim says, I never saw it, that is not a halachic ruling. You can't go based on, I never saw it, to to now say that the Kohen can keep the hide for this treifa. No way, no how. This animal came into the Beis Hamikdash. It was already a treifa. You're not getting the Kohen are not getting this hide. Take it out and burn it. I know Rabbi Hanina Sgan Hakohanim said he never saw it. Great for him. Burn it according to the Chacham. Givaldig. Okay. Now, says the Gemara, Kol shelo zocha hamizbeach bibsar lo zocha kohanim ba'ora. Now, this is the Mishnah from yesterday. The Mishnah from yesterday, as we've already pointed out twice already, I think, said, Kol shelo zocha hamizbeach bibsar, if the mizbeach does not receive the meat of the korban, if the korban will not be burnt on the mizbeach, lo zocha kohanim ba'ora, the kohanim don't get the hide. As simple as that. If the meat or the emurim, whatever it is, will not be burnt on the mizbeach, the kohanim will not be receiving the hides. As simple as that. Ve'afal gav de'af shetei le'or kodem zrika. And even if the animal had already been skinned before the Zerikas hadam. Right? What did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said, if they've already been skinned, says our Mishnah here, if they've already been skinned, or say the Kohanim. The Gemara wants to say, what does that mean? It means that you have an animal, let's say an ola, that was slaughtered. It was skinned prior to Zerikas hadam, which is a whole thing. What does that even mean? Why would it be before Zerikas hadam? But it was skinned before Zerikas hadam. And then the animal became pasul. So by doing Zerikas hadam now, it's good. So the animal itself is pasul. But what about the skin? The animal's already been skinned. What about the hide? So when you do Zerikas hadam, it allows the hide to go to the Kohanim. But of course, Zerikas hadam is matir, the emurim to burn on the mizbeach, the meat to be eaten by the Kohanim, and the hide to go to the Kohanim as well. So we have this animal, we have this ola that was slaughtered, was skinned. The meat became pasul. By doing Zerikas hadam, right, what the Mishnah is saying, Kilif was already skinned. So then when you do Zerikas hadam, it's going to allow the hide to go to the Kohen. However, we had the Mishnah yesterday which made a low plug. It said, Kol shel zocha mizbeach lo zocha kohanim ba'ora. The Mishnah yesterday had said that if the animal is not going on the mizbeach, well then the Kohanim are not getting the hide. And even if it was skinned before the Zerikas hadam, I don't care, says the Mishnah from yesterday. And the Mishnah from today says, I do care. Friends, do we care or don't we care? Neil, what do you think? So says the Gemara, Mani Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon he. Well, the Mishnah from yesterday, which said that even though the animal was skinned before Zerikas hadam, the Mishnah from yesterday said that even though the animal was already skinned before the Zerikas hadam, makes no difference. The Kohen will not receive the hide. So below Reb Shimon's opinion, the Amar who says Ein Adam Miratza La'or Bifnei Atzmo, the Reb Shimon's opinion is that Zerikas hadam is not going to be Miratza for the hide itself. If the korban is kosher, it's a kosher korban, and you do Zerikas hadam, okay, givaldig, it'll be matir the meat. If it's a korban ola, it'll be matir now after Zerikas hadam, now the meat can be burned on the mizbeach, the hide can go to the kohanim, okay, that's if the korban is kosher. But if the meat becomes pasul, the Zerikas hadam is not going to work to be matir just the hide. No way, the Zerikas hadam is not going to be matir the hide. Let's actually take a second, friends, let's talk out actually the machlokas between Rebbe and Reb and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, because it's not the most explicitly it's laid out is actually going to be on Kuf Daled Amud Aleph, and until then you get like little pieces of the machlokas. So let's get right to the point with the machlokas between Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, so we understand where they're coming from. Because right now we're going to be jumping into this machlokes, so let's at least discuss what it is. The way that Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon views it is that it's all about, is it before Zerikas hadam or after Zerikas hadam? Did the pasul happen before Zerikas hadam, in which case the hide is unsalvageable, or did the pasul happen after Zerikas hadam, in which case the hide is just fine? Even if it becomes pasul when the hide is still on the animal, flay the animal and give the hide to the kohen. If it's post Zerikas hadam, so meaning if prior to Zerikas hadam already the animal is pasul, and you haven't even done Zerikas hadam yet, forget about it. The kohen is not getting that hide. I don't care whether you already skinned it, didn't skin it, makes no difference. If the pasul is before Zerikas hadam, forget about it. The kohen is getting nothing. But if at the time of Zerikas hadam, the korbin was still kosher, and you did Zerikas hadam, and that was now matir the meat to be burned on the mizbeach for an ola, and the hide to go to the kohen, if then at that point it becomes pasul, well, there was already, there was already a shasa kosher. The hide was already able to go to the kohen. So skin the animal and give the hide to the kohen. So what's critical according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon is, did the pasul happen before the Zerikas hadam or after the Zerikas hadam? That is what Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon cares about. Rebbe cares about, was the animal skinned at the time of the pasul? If at the time of the pasul, the animal was already skinned, and that skin was no longer part of the meat of the animal, and then the korbin becomes pasul. So the meat is pasul, but the skin was already skinned, and it can go to the kohen. If at the time of the pasul, the animal and the skin were united, the skin was still on the animal, well then you can't skin it afterwards and give it to the kohen. If at the time of the pasul, the skin was still on the animal, according to Rebbe, so then the hide cannot go to the kohen. If at the time of the pasul, the animal was already skinned and the hide was already separated, then the hide does go to the kohen. You do Zerikas hadam, even though the animal itself is pasul, you'll do Zerikas hadam, it'll be matir the hide, according to Rebbe, and that can go to the kohen. So, to recap, according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, the critical moment that we're talking about by the pasul of the korbin is Zerikas hadam. Had Zerikas hadam been done yet? Okay, if this is prior to Zerikas hadam, the hide does not go to the kohen. If it's post Zerikas hadam, it's after Zerikas hadam, the hide does go to the kohen. According to the Rebbe, it's about, was the hide on the animal at the time of the pasul? If the hide was on the animal at the time of the pasul, so then forget about it. The hide is pasul with the rest of the animal. It's not going to the kohen. If the animal had already been skinned at the time of the pasul, so then the hide can go to the kohen. If it's before Zerikas hadam, we'll do the Zerikas hadam, we'll be matir the hide, it goes to the kohen. Okay, that's the machlokes. So now, that being said, so what did we just do? So we just said that the Mishnah from yesterday, which says, lo plug, that if the korbin won't be burned on the mizbeach, so then the kohen will not be getting the hide, then the hide does not go to the kohen. Even if it was already skinned, the animal was already skinned before the Zerikas hadam, that is Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, who says, since it's before the Zerikas hadam, forget about it. Okay, so Mani, who is the author of yesterday's Mishnah? Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimoni, the Amar, who says, Ein adam miratze, or that if prior to Zerikas hadam the korbin became pasul, even if it was already skinned, the blood, the Zerikas hadam, will not be able to be miratze for the or b'fnei atzmo, for the hide alone. It can only be miratze for a kosher animal, but if the animal is already pasul, it can't help for just the skin. Amos Seifa, however, who's the author of our current Mishnah? Kol akodshim she'ira boyin pasul kodim ev shaitan. That our Mishnah says that if the pasul happened before skinning, when the skin was still on the animal, ain or usein the kohanim, so in that case the hide will not go to the kohen. However, la'achar ev shaitan, if at the time of the pasul the animal was already skinned, if at the time of the pasul the animal was already skinned, or usein the kohanim, no problem, you'll do Zerikas hadam, and that would be matir the hide to go to the kohen. All good. That's on the Rebbe. That's the Rebbe's opinion. The Rebbe says that Zerikas hadam could be meratze for the hide alone, and that will go to the kohen, since at the time of the Zerikas, since at the time of the pasul, the animal was already skinned. You do Zerikas hadam, and now the hide goes to the kohen. In fact, the Gemara, I don't understand. Reisha Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon Seifa Rebbe. What's going on here? Yesterday's Mishnah was Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon. Today's Mishnah is Rebbe. Can we get some consistency over here? Amar Abaye, says Abaye, Midiseifa Rebbe. He Reisha Nami Rebbe. Says Abaye, you know what? Look, this Mishnah, our Mishnah from today, it's Rebbe, right? It says that if the pasul happened after the animal was skinned, so the hide can go to the kohen. That's Rebbe. And therefore, since today's Mishnah is Rebbe, yesterday's Mishnah was also Rebbe. But one second, wasn't the implication from yesterday's Mishnah that even if the animal was skinned at the time of the pasul, and then Zerikas hadam was Zerikas hadam, the hide can go to the kohen? No. What? Didn't yesterday's Mishnah imply that even then the hide would not go to the kohen? Here is the thing, friends. Here's the thing. It's an important thing. And here is this thing that's important. So we, of course, know now the opinion of Rebbe that if the korban ola was slaughtered, okay, the blood was received in a klisharis, and then instead of doing, chevra, what would you expect to happen next? The ola was slaughtered. The blood was received in the klisharis. Chevra, what do you think should happen next? Zerikas hadam, right? Take the blood, bring it over to the mizbeach, throw it on the mizbeach. But we know that, and that's what's supposed to be done. And that's what happens 99% of the time. However, we have learned that if it didn't happen, and instead the kohen is standing around holding the blood in a klisharis, probably moving it around and keeping it jiggling it around to make sure that it doesn't congeal, while instead they get busy skinning the animal, all the while somebody's standing there, as we say in my family, standing there like an idiot, holding the blood, while somebody else is skinning the animal before you do Zerikas hadam. This doesn't make any sense. But yeah, Rebbe's opinion is, if they did this, and somebody, if they did shchita, kabbalas hadam, and then they said, wait, now we're going to skin the animal, and they skin the animal, now the skin is separate from the animal, and then it becomes pasul, and then they do Zerikas hadam. Rebbe says, look, technically in that case, the hide can go to the kohen. That's correct. But that isn't what you're supposed to do. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to slaughter the animal, do kabbalas hadam, Zerikas hadam, and only then do you you skin the animal. So therefore, the Mishnah from yesterday is also Rebbe. And when the Mishnah was saying that if the animal is not going to be burnt on the mizbeach, then the kohanim aren't going to get the hides, it's assuming that things were done normally, which is that that at the time, therefore, that the animal became pasul, it wasn't yet skinned, right? The animal was slaughtered, and before it was skinned, it became pasul. And it became pasul when the skin was still on there. Or if it became pasul after it was skinned, it was already after Zerikas hadam. Kilu, right? Meaning if they slaughtered the korban, there was Kabbalah hadam, Zerikas hadam, the korban is still kosher, it has a shasa kosher, right? And then they skin the animal, and then it becomes pasul, right? So it's going to be, right? It's going to be kosher in that case, right? So when the Mishnah said yesterday that if it becomes pasul, the kohen doesn't get the hide, and we're talking about before Zerikas hadam, so we're assuming that the hide was therefore still on it because you weren't going to be skinning it before the Zerikas hadam. Technically speaking, if you did it in this very strange way, where you went completely out of order and you had somebody standing there like an idiot while somebody else is skinning the animal, and then it became tummy, technically speaking, Rebbe would say that the hide can go to the kohen. However, yesterday when the Mishnah simply said straight up, if the animal is pasul, then the hide doesn't go to the kohen, it's assuming that things were being done normally, that the animal got pasul before Zerikas hadam, and the hide was still on the animal. And that's why, and Rebbe would say, therefore, if the hide is still on the animal, it does not go to the kohen. Sheesh. Yeah, there's a lot here on this first section of the daf. So again, Abai, it says Abai, look, Midasefer Rebbe, he Reishanami Rebbe, from the fact that this Mishnah, today's Mishnah, which talks about that if it was skinned and then became pasul, the hide goes to the kohen, that's Rebbe. So the previous Mishnah was also Rebbe. However, Umode Rebbe does admit she'ein hevshit kodem zrika, that the normal way, the proper way, is that you wait until after Zerikas hadam to do hefshit in order to flay the animal, in order to skin the animal, right? And therefore, in yesterday's Mishnah, when we're talking about that the animal became pasul, so we're assuming that at that point it hadn't yet been flayed yet. Okay, let me just look at Rashi for a second. Okay, fine. Okay, time machine the pasul, the kodem zrika, right? Kodem hefsheru, exactly. Right. So yesterday was talking about if the pasul happened before Zerikas hadam, and normally speaking, that would be when the hide was still on the animal, and that's why Rebbe simply said that the hide does not go to the kohen, because the assumption was, since it was before Zerikas hadam, it wasn't yet skinned. But technically, yes, Rebbe would say, if it was already skinned before Zerikas hadam, even though that's strange, it would be kosher. Now, Rava says the opposite. So Rava takes the opposite approach. Right? Remember, we had said at the simple read of things, yesterday's Mishnah looks like Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, who says that the Zerikas hadam won't be effective for just the hide. Today's Mishnah looks like Rebbe. Abai said, since today's Mishnah looks like Rebbe, let's say that yesterday's Mishnah was also Rebbe. Rava says the opposite. Since yesterday's Mishnah looks like Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, let's say today's Mishnah looks like Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon. The challenge with saying that today's Mishnah looks like Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon is that our Mishnah, today's Mishnah had said that if at the time of the pasul the animal was already skinned, so the skin goes to the kohen. But how could that be? Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon says that if it's prior to Zerikas hadam, the Zerikas hadam would not work for just the hide. So Sefer Namar Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, Umay Kodem Hefshit, what does it mean prior to skinning? Umay Achor Hefshit, and after skinning? Kodem Shenir Ulefshit, Achor Shenir Ulefshit. It means before it was fit for being skinned, i.e. before Zerikas hadam, and after it was fit for being skinned, i.e. after Zerikas hadam. i.e. if the pasul happens before Zerikas hadam, it's automatically going to be pasul no matter what. I don't care if the skin was on it or not. And if it's after Zerikas hadam, it is going to be kosher no matter what, because that's the opinion of Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, that what's important was the pasul before Zerikas hadam or is the pasul after Zerikas hadam. My Rebbe, Umay Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon. Now we finally, after all of that discussion, we actually see with our own eyes what is the actual machlokas between Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, decided that we learn in a brayser. Rebbe Omer says, Rebbe hadam miratze ala or b'fnei atzmo, that in the event that the animal was skinned prior to Zerikas hadam, So the Zerikas hadam, right? So if the animal itself is pasul, the Zerikas hadam can nonetheless work to permit just the hide to the Kohanim. Ukshehu ima basar nolad bo pasul. Now, if while the hide was still connected to the meat, when it was not yet skinned, if at that point the animal became pasul, well then, ben kodem zrika, ben la'acha zrika, I don't care if it was before zrika or after zrika, the hide is just as pasul as the korbin. The hide will be pasul just like the korbin is. So again, we see that according to Rebbe, the important thing is, was it skinned at the time of the pasul or not? If it was not skinned, if the skin was still connected to the animal at the time of the pasul, I don't care before zrika, after zrika, it makes no difference. The hide will not be going to the Kohen. Reb Shimon Omer, and says Reb Shimon, Ein hadam miratze al or b'fnei atzmo, that if the animal became pasul before Zerikas hadam, I don't care if it had already been skinned, the Zerikas hadam won't be effective to allow the hide to go to the Kohen. Uchshehu im abasar. Now, if the hide is connected to the meat, nolad bo pasul kodem zrika, so if the pasul happened before Zerikas hadam, areu kayotze bo, well then the hide is pasul just like the korbin, it won't be going to the Kohen. Achar zrika, however, if it's after Zerikas hadam, it became pasul, hurtza basar, if after Zerikas hadam the animal became pasul, hurtza basar shah achas, if the meat was permitted, if even only for, what does it say, shah achas, an hour, I assume it means any amount of time, yafshitenu v'oro l'kayanim, even, right, so it's after, so if it becomes pasul after Zerikas hadam, even if the hide is still part of the animal, skin it, give the hide to the Kohen, because the important thing, according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, was the pasul before Zerikas hadam or after Zerikas hadam. Lema b'der Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua Kmifli. Let's suggest that the machlokes between Rabbi and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon is based on the machlokes between, and aligns with the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. The Sani that we learn in the Brisa. Vasisa olesecha basar v'adam, you will make your olas meat and blood. Rabbi Yeshua says, Rabbi Yeshua, im ein dam ein basar, im ein basar ein dam. Says Rabbi Yeshua, you need both. If the blood spills out on the floor, there's no blood, so then there's no meat. If there's no meat, the meat becomes pasul, there's no Zerikas hadam. When you have meat, when you have a kosher korban, you have the meat, you have the blood, azoy, you do Zerikas hadam. If one of the elements is missing, the blood is gone, the meat is gone, so without meat, there's no Zerikas hadam, without blood, there's no kosher korban, meat. Rabbi Eliezer Omer says, Rabbi Eliezer, wait, dam afal pisha ein basar. One second, even if the meat becomes pasul, you could still do Zerikas hadam. Shenemar zbazas v'dam zvachecha yishafech, that you will spill the blood of your offerings even if there's no meat. We had vasisa olesecha basar ve'adam, we had meat and blood, and here we also have even blood alone is okay even if there's no meat. So Rabbi Eliezer, then what do you learn with basar v'dam? Basar ve'adam. Don't you need both of them? To say that just like you throw the blood onto the mizbeach, against the walls of the mizbeach, you also throw the meat onto the pyre. So we see, why is the kohen throwing the meat from the kevesh onto the pyre? Because there was a space, a gap between the kevesh, the ramp, and the mizbeach, and the kohen would throw the limbs and whatever, imurim, I guess, whatever was burnt on the mizbeach, the kohen would throw that onto the mizbeach. Just like the blood was thrown on the mizbeach, the meat was also thrown on the mizbeach, and there was a gap in between the kevesh and the mizbeach, and the meat would be thrown across that gap on to the pyre on top of the mizbeach. Sounds like fun. Lema mandamer hurtza Rabbi Eliezer. So let's say that Rebbe, who says that even if the meat of the korban is pasul, you could still, right, assuming that the animal had been skinned, you can still do Zerikas hadam even without the meat, and the Zerikas hadam will be helpful for the hide. And that's like Rabbi Eliezer, who says even without the meat, you would still do the Zerikas hadam. Umadamar lo hurtza, and Rabbi Eliezer Reb Shimon, who says no way, no how. If the korban is pasul, you are not doing Zerikas hadam, it will be ineffective. Rabbi Yoshua, it's like Rabbi Yoshua, who says no meat, no dam. No meat, no blood, no Zerikas hadam. So Gemara says, well, look, okay, to say that Rebbe, who says that you do the Zerikas hadam even with the pasul korban, is aligned with Rabbi Eliezer, who says that as well. Okay, fair enough. No one's going to argue with that. However, we could argue that both Rabbi Eliezer, Reb Shimon, and Rebbe would make the claim that Rabbi Yoshua is on their team, is on their side. Okay, obviously, Rabbi Eliezer Reb Shimon, who says that there's no doing Zerikas hadam once the korban is pasul. So clearly, Rabbi Eliezer Reb Shimon is siding with, we're going to say that. Let's say this: Rabbi Eliezer Reb Shimon would say, Rabbi Yoshua agrees with me. Rabbi Yoshua, who says that no meat, no blood, agrees with me. Rabbi Yoshua will agree with me, Rabbi Eliezer Reb Shimon, that once the korban is pasul, then there's no Zerikas hadam. Now, Mandamar Hurtza, now where am I? So lower to Rabbi Yoshua. Now, Mandamar Hurtza, however, Rebbe, who says that even when the korban is pasul, if the animal had already been skinned, so then the Zerikas hadam is effective. Rebbe will argue that Rabbi Yoshua would ultimately agree with that. Even though Rabbi Yoshua says when there's no meat, there's no blood, says Rebbe, at the end of the day, Rebbe believes that Rabbi Yoshua would agree with him, that even if the animal is pasul, but it's already been skinned, the Zerikas hadam can work for the hide, to allow it to the Kohanim. So Amalach Rebbe would say, Ad kan lokam Rabbi Yoshua hasam, that Rabbi Yoshua says no meat, no blood. When there's no meat, when the korban is pasul, so you're not going to do Zerikas hadam. El bebaser, that's specifically if we're only talking about the meat, the lekab seder lekohanim, and there's no loss to the kohanim. Right, the meat was anyways going on the mizbeach. The kohanim weren't getting it, and by saying that we lost the meat, okay, we lost the meat. There's no after the kohanim. But when it comes to the hide, by saying that the Zerikas hadam will not permit the hide to the kohanim, the kohanim are losing. They're losing the hide of an animal. Or when it comes to the hide, the ikab said to the kohanim that there's real ramifications for the kohanim if they're getting a hide or not. Rabbi Yoshua would admit that even though Rabbi Yoshua would say, look, the korban is pasul, you shouldn't be doing Zerikas hadam, even though yes, it means that the kohanim are going to lose the hide. But the chatchila, you shouldn't be doing Zerikas hadam if the korban is pasul. However, b'diavad, Rebbe argues that Rabbi Yoshua, and with good reason, as we'll see in a second, Rabbi Yoshua would say that at least b'diavad, if Zerikas hadam was done, even though it shouldn't have been done, if it was done, it would be matir the hide, and the kohanim can get the hide. The tanya that we learn in a b'raise, nitma basar, if the meat becomes tamei or nifsal or pasul sheyatza chutz l'klayim, that went outside of the azar. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yizrok. Rabbi Eliezer says, nonetheless, you would still do Zerikas hadam, even though the animal is pasul. Rabbi Yoshua Omer Lo Yizrok. Rabbi Yoshua says, of course, don't do Zerikas hadam. If the animal is pasul, don't do Zerikas hadam. However, Umad Rabbi Yoshua Shimzarek, where it's Rabbi Yoshua, however, does admit that if Zerikas hadam was done, then it would be effective. And therefore, Rebbe argues that even though Rabbi Yoshua would say not to do Zerikas hadam, Rebbe argues that, and based on this brisa, that if Zerikas hadam was done, it would be maratza for the hide, and it would go to the Kohen, and therefore Rebbe argues that Rabbi Yoshua would be on his side as well. Okay, friends, so that was the really demanding part of today's daf. This next section, I would say, if we break, I think we could break up the daf into like really demanding, Gemara-y kind of intermediate demanding, and then not particularly demanding. We're now getting up to the, I would say, intermediate demanding. I don't anticipate this next section to be particularly demanding. It's not as easy as after that, but okay, here we go. So wait, should we review? I don't really want to spend too much time reviewing what we did so far. It's pretty intense, and we did it pretty thoroughly, I think. But just like to, before we move on, I guess just to like kind of like get some closure there. Basically, we had seen a machlokas really between Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon about at what point, what did I even say? Kohens receiving hides of pasul. Basically, at what stage of let's say a korban ola being pasul? Well, the idea was to get some closure here. I feel like I'm not really helping. But we saw this machlokas between Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon about at which point the Kohanim would be unable to receive hides from a korbin, and at which point would they? The funny thing is, when I was trying to think, it took me a long time earlier to try to think how to like define this section of the daf. Actually, it's not easy to define. Like we went through the machlokas. Okay, I get it. There's like a machlokas here, but like how do you define what the machlokas is about? I don't really know. How do you define it in like a simple line? But it has to do with whether or not Kohanim can receive hides or not, based on at what point the korban became pasul. We saw machlokas between Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shua. That was kind of the big machlokas that we had up until now. Now we are moving on. Okay, I hope that gave closure. Hanina Sgan Hakohanim. Oh, so we saw in the Mishnah, Rabbi Hanina Sgan Hakohanim had said that in his tenure as the deputy Kohen Gadol, I think that's what the Sgan Hakohanim is. As a deputy Kohen Gadol, he had never seen a hide being taken out to be burned. Villa, what do you mean? Hare, parim nesafim v'sirim nesafim. What? There was no parim nesafim v'sirim nesafim? Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, there was the par. There's a par Yom Kippurim, Sar Yom Kippurim. Those were taken out, michutz lamachne, and burned. What was there no Yom Kippur? Was there no par Yom Kippurim, Sar Yom Kippurim? What does it mean? You never saw an animal and a korbin's hide being taken out to be burned? What about inner chatases that are taken out and burned? The mitzvahs and lo kamina. No. We're not talking about korbanos that are supposed to burn their skin. We're talking about pasul korbanos that instead of giving the hide to the kohen, you're going out and burning it. Says Rabbi Hanina Sgan Hakohanim, I never saw that. Hare kodem hevshit v'kodem zrika. But what about? I mean, both Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon would agree that if the animal became pasul while the hide was still on it and before Zerikas hadam, everyone would agree that it would be taken out to be burned. Right? Because according to Rebbe, the hide was still on it when it became pasul. And according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, it was prior to Zerikas hadam. Everyone would agree, take it out to burn it. So what about that scenario? Chalutz ka'aminon. Well, we're saying that Rabbi Hanina Sgan Hakohanim never saw a hide alone, instead of being given to the kohen, being taken out to be burned. He never saw that. Va'ika acher hefshit v'kodem zrika. But what about when the animal has been skinned before Zerikas hadam? The Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, the Amar who says ein adam ratze ala or b'fnei atzmo, who says that the blood will not be meratze for just the hide. So wouldn't you have to take that out to be burnt? Rabbi Hanina Rebbe Svirle. One way to answer that is that Rabbi Hanina Sgan Hakohanim holds like Rebbe, that actually the Zerikas hadam would allow, in that case, since the animal was already skinned, the Zerikas hadam would allow the hide to go to the kohen. Alternatively, afilu tukma Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon. You can even say it's like Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, who says that the Zerikas hadam would not allow the hide to go to the kohen, but still, Moda Rebbe she'ein efshit kodem zrika, that even Rebbe admitted, the fact of the matter is, right, even though he says that the Zerikas hadam would be effective if there had already been skinning before the Zerikas hadam, but he does say that at the end of the day, that is the wrong way to be doing things, and to be doing things in that order makes no sense. As we talked about earlier, the Kohen standing there like an idiot holding the blood. So therefore, the fact of the matter is, it was highly unlikely, and therefore it's understandable that Reb Hanina Sgan Hakohanim never saw this hide being taken out to be burned, because it's highly unlikely that the skinning of the hide would have happened while there's a Kohen standing there doing nothing, holding the blood, just waiting for somebody else to skin the animal. That doesn't make sense. And even if for some reason they did that, the animal would also have to somehow become pasul. And therefore it's, even if this initial highly unlikely thing that they went out of order happened, another, I imagine, at least relatively unlikely thing would have also had to have happened, that the animal became pasul. And it's understandable that both those two phenomenon together never happened during Reb Hanina Sgan Hakohanim's tenure. That is feasible. But what about if it turns out this sounds much more feasible? What about you have an animal, you slaughtered it, you skinned it, right? You slaughtered it, Zerikas hadam, everything normal, skinned it, and turns out while you were cutting it up or whatever, you noticed that internally it was a treifa, which means that by the time it came into the Beis HaMikdash, it was already a treifa, which means that while the skin was still on it, and before Zerikas hadam, it was already sick, it was already a treifa. So in that case, should the hide, which had already been removed from the rest of the body, should that not have gone out to be burnt? So kasavar nimtzes sheva b'nei ma'ayim miratze. Well, Reb Hanina Sgan Hakohanim holds that in that scenario, actually the Zerikas hadam would suffice for the hide. Because what does Rashi say? Miratze hora v'lo huker psulo kodem efshit. Right? Since this psul of the treifa was not known before the skinning, so therefore we'll say that the skin can be kept in that case, and therefore it wasn't taken out to be burnt. This also seems to be the case that Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva midvar v'lamadnu, that what do we learn from Rabbi Hanina Sgan Hakohanim? We learn that that if somebody skins a bechor, the nimtza treifa, and it turns out that it was a treifa the whole time, sheyeosu ha kohanim ba'oro, that the kohen can keep the hide shmamina. So we see that yes, apparently that is what Rabbi Hanina Sgan Hakohanim was saying, that if they skinned the animal and then they find out after the fact that, oh wait, this was actually a treifa, the hide can nonetheless go to the Kohen, and that is how Rab Akiva concluded that, okay, so we see that this bechor that turns out to be a treifa, the Kohen can keep the hide. But if that's the case, what's Rab Akiva teaching us that Rab Hanina Sgan Hakohanim didn't already teach? Is he just parroting Rab Hanina Sgan Hakohanim? Right? That if it turns out that after the skinning it's a treifa, you can keep the hide? That's literally what Rab Hanina Sgan Hakohanim said. So Kamash Malon, afilu bigvulin. Interesting. So what Rabbi Akiva is teaching us is that even outside of the Beis HaMikdash, what does it mean outside the Beis HaMikdash? If the bechor turned out to be a mum, because the way bechor works is that it's given to the Kohen, and then the Kohen brings it to the Beis HaMikdash and he offers it as a konshim kalam, as a korban bechor. Now, if the bechor gets a mum, so then you just eat it. You just slaughter it and you eat it. So what we're saying is, if the bechor got a mum, so you slaughtered it to eat it, and it turns out that it was a treifa. So what Rabbi Akiva is saying is that in that case, you could still keep the hide. Because the thing is, when it comes to bechor, if you have a bechor that dies, it's also bano. A bechor that pashit drops dead, it's also bano. You can't get benefit from the hide. So the chiddush is that here you slaughtered it to eat it because it had a mum, and it did have a mum, but it turned out that not only did it have a mum, it was a treifa. So maybe it would be considered like a bechor that died, and you can't get benefit from the hide. So what Rabbi Akiva is teaching is that actually in that case, you slaughtered it, turns out it's a treifa, you can get benefit from the hide. Amar B'chia Ba'aba Rabbi Yochanan Halacha Rabbi Akiva. Says Rabbi Ba'aba Amar Rabbi Yochanan that the halacha is in fact like Rabbi Akiva. Af ve'af Rabbi Akiva lo Amar el kishetiru mumche aval kishetiru aval lo etiru mumche lo. When it comes to a bechor, a mum of a bechor, to allow it to be slaughtered and eaten has to be permitted by mumche. If you remember from Daf Hey Masechta Sanhedrin, when Rav and Rav Bar Chana were going to Babble, from Eretz Yisrael to Babble, they went to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, right? Rabbi Chia took them to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and they got smicha, right? They said, Yore, Yore, Yodin, Yodin, Yatir Bechoris, and Rebbe said about Rav, Al Yatir, he can't be Matir. So, right, so just like, right, Yore, Yore is a type of smicha to allow, right, to be more aloche, Yodin, Yodin is dinim ominous, is like, nizikin and stuff, and then Yatir Bechor is, are you an expert to be allowed to permit Bechors to be eaten, that they have mums? An expert when it comes to the mums of Bechors. So, and as we're learning about Masechta Bechoris, that a Bechor needs to be permitted by a mumche, by an expert. So when Rabbi Akiva says that if you slaughter it and it turns out that it was a treifa, you can get benefit from the hide, that's also assuming that you're slaughtering it because an expert had already determined that it had a real mum, and you slaughtered it because it had a mum, and then it turned out that it was a treifa, you can keep the hide in that case. But if a mumche, if it was not permitted by a mumche, then no, you wouldn't be able to get benefit from the hide. The Gemara says something, I don't know, a little hard to understand here, that the halacha is like the chacham, I guess not like Rabbi Akiva. It's a question of what exactly that means, but okay, let's assume it means that the halacha is not like Rabbi Akiva, it's like the chacham, but I mean, yeah, let's assume it means that the Gemara is arguing with Rabbi Akiva Barav and saying that the halacha is not like Rabbi Akiva, rather it's like the chacham. Let's say that's what it means. And now we get up to the second Mishnah of today's daf that discusses chatases, apnimioses, par manisofim, sir manisofim. Cows that are burnt, sheep that are burnt, goats that are burnt. Who can tell me what these are? What's one example of a par manisofim? Par Yom Kippurim. The cow that the Kohen Gadol, right there, that atones for the Kohanim on Yom Kippur. Who can give me another example of a par manisofim? Par Davar Tzibur, Par Kohen Mashiach, Sir Manisofim, Sayer Yom Kippur, Sir Avodah Zarah. Right, these are all examples of animals that are not eaten. They're taken outside, as we're going to see. They're taken outside of Yerushalayim and burnt there. Par Manisofim, Sir Manisofim. Bismachein Nisrofin Kimitzvasun. When they are burnt properly, nothing pasul happens. Nisrofim Bebeis Hadeshin, they are taken out, as we're going to see in the Gemara, outside of Yerushalayim and burnt by the Beis Hadeshin. It would be burnt there outside of Yerushalayim. I don't know if there was necessarily a specific place. I'll look it up in the Rambam. Anyways, but it was taken outside of Yerushalayim and burnt there. I'm imagining a specific place where they would burn these korbanos, but I think maybe the most important thing is that it was outside of Yerushalayim. And interestingly, anybody involved with the burning of these korbanos, their clothing would be tamei. My impression is, we'll see if maybe the Gemara talks about it, but my impression is that they are tamei, and then they go to the mikveh, and then my impression is that they're immediately tahor. Like, I don't think that they're tamei until the evening or anything. I think that they're tamei, and then they go to the mikveh, and then the tumah goes away, I think. Ve'im einon nisrafin kimitzvason. Now, if something goes wrong, if some kind of pasul happens to the korban, and therefore it's not going to be burnt properly, normally, because something went wrong. So nisrafin bebeis abira, they're burnt in the base abira. The Gemara is going to discuss what that is. Ve'enim metam begadim, and in that case, if it's being burnt in the base abira, because the base abira is not outside of Yerushalayim, it's somewhere on Har Abayis. The Gemara is going to discuss it. And in that case, since the animal was not kosher and became pasul and was therefore burnt to the Beis Habira, the people dealing with it, their clothing will not. Right? They and their clothing will not become tamei. How you sold now? now as part of the parim anisrafim, right? You have a par. Par is a big animal. You slaughter it, and now you got to schlep it outside of Yerushalayim to burn it. So you sovlin also, they would schlep the cow bimotos. What does this vav say? I mean, I guess it could be that it's also like the seir manisrafim, but definitely I imagine the more significant schlep is going to be the cow. So they would schlep the cow out bimotis on poles, because they would have these, I don't know if pole is the right word, but essentially a pole, I think. And they would have the Kohanim taken out the nisrafim, certainly at least the cow. I imagine also, I guess probably also the goat. How else are you going to get it out? So Yotza Rishonim Chutz L'Chomas Hazara. Once the people in front leave the Azara, V'achronim Lo Yatzu, and the people on the other end of the pole have not yet left the Azara. Rishonim Mitam and Begadim. Immediately upon leaving the Azara, the people in front, their clothing becomes tamei. I believe they and their clothing becomes tamei. Ve'acharonim einam tamei begadim, and the people in the back who have not yet left the Azara, their clothing is still tahor. Achayetsu, until they leave. Yatsu elu mitamin begadim. Once everyone has left the Azara, everyone's clothing is tamei. Reb Shimon Omer, Reb Shimon disagrees. He says einam mitamin ad sheyutzasa or beruban, that everyone's clothing becomes tamei only once they've gotten outside of Yerushalayim and start burning the animal, and most of the body of the animal has been consumed. Only at that point, everyone who's dealt with the animal till that point, their clothing will become tamei. Nitach habasar ein asoif mitami begadim. Once the animal has been, all the flesh of the animal has been completely consumed, anybody who gets involved at that point their clothing will remain tahor. Nobody's becoming tamei at that point. Says the Gemara, my bira. What is this bira? Right? We said that if you don't end up burning the korbin properly, some kind of pasul happens. So it says you burn it in the bira. We're actually going to learn that there's another place where you might end up burning it. But anyways, my bira, what's this bira? Omer Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, says Rabbi Bar Bar Chana. That's interesting. You see Rashi on the Mishnah says, what's the bira? Paimim ba'azara, paimim ba'arabayas. Interesting. Sometimes the bira is in the azara, sometimes it's in harabayas. Okay, let's go weiter for a second. I guess it looks like it's machlekes Rashi in the Rambam. Anyways, my bira, what's his bira? Omer Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, Omer Rabbi Yechanan, Makom yesh ba'arabayas uvir shmod. So it says Rabbi Bar Chana, Omer Rabbi Yechanan, there was a specific place on harabayas that was called bira, and that's where they would burn the korbin if some kind of pasul happened. V'shlakish, says V'shlakish, call abayis kulo kori bira, that the entire base of Mikdash, according to V'shlakish, is called the bira shenemar habira she'achinosi. David Melech says that he refers to the base of Mikdash as the bira that I prepared. Okay, so the bira was either harabayis or a particular place on harabayis. Let's go weiter. Amar Nachman, Amar Rabbi Bar Avua, shlosha beis hadashanon hein. So says Rav Nachman in the name of Rabbi Bar Avua that there were 3 Beis Hadeshins. There were 3 Beis Hadeshins. Beis Hadeshin Gadol HaYibazara. One Beis Hadeshin where they would burn stuff was in the Azara itself. Shesham Sorfin, it says Beis Hadeshin Gadol, a big Beis Hadeshin in the Azara, that there they would burn Psule Kodshe Kodshim. It's like a chatases became pasul or something. What are you going to do? You're not going to offer it on the mizbeach. So what do you do with it? You burn it there in the azar, in the Beis Hadeshin. That was in the azar. Ve'emure kachim kalim. If anything happens to the emurim, either of a kachim or of a kachim kalim, they would also be burnt there at the Beis Hadeshin in the azar. Ufarim anisrafim, sir anisrafim, she'ir ben pasul kodem zrika. Also by the parim anisrafim, the sir anisrafim, if some kind of pasul happened to them before Zerikas hadam, so they would be burnt in the azar. Now, Rashi had said, as we just read Rashi on the Mishnah already, had said regarding the bira, paim bazar, paim bahar abayis. Sometimes the bira was in the Azar, sometimes in the Harabayis. I think the point is that Rashi refers to this Beis Hadeshin in the Azar that we just talked about also as the bira. And the Parim Sofim, Sirim Sofim, if they became pasul before Zerikas hadam, they would be burnt in this bira that was in the Azara. However, I believe that the Rambam does not refer to this, to the Beis Hadeshin in the Azara as the bira. There was another Beis Hadeshin Harabayis. So according to Rashi, this would also be the bira. However, I think according to the Rambam, the Rambam says that this is actually what the bira is. Shesham Sorfim Parim Sofim Sirim Sofim, and there they would burn the Parim Sofim Sirim Sofim She'er Ben Pasul Acher Zrika. That if they became pasul after Zerikas hadam, so then they wouldn't be taken outside of Yerushalayim because they became pasul, but it was after Zerikas hadam, so then they would be burnt at the bira on Harabayis. Uchimitzvasan, and if everything worked out properly, chutz l'shalosh machanos, then the Parim Sofim Sirim Sofim would be taken outside of all three camps, outside of Yerushalayim, or in the Midbar, outside of all three camps, and burnt there. Tani Levi teaches slightly differently. Shlosha Beis Hadeshin, there were three Beis Hadeshins. Again, it's mostly the same, slightly different. Beis Hadeshin Gadol Haya Ba'Azar, there was a big Beis Hadeshin in the Azar, Shesham Sorfim Psule Kachim Kachim, where they would burn pasul Kachim Kachim, Be'emur Kachim Kalim, and Be'emurim of Kachim Kalim, that became pasul. Uparim Anisrofim, Usir Manisrofim, She'ir Ben Psul, Bein Kodem Zika, Bein Lachar Zika. As well as Parim Sofim, Sirim Sofim. Now here's where Levi is different, that he says whether the psul happened before Zerikas hadam or after Zerikas hadam, but it was still in the Azara, so they would be burnt at the Beis Hadeshin in the Azara. Now, Beis Hadeshin Acher Oya Ba'Harabayis, there was another Beis Hadeshin on Harabayis, that was right the bira, Shesham Sorfin, Parim Sofim, Sirim Sofim, She'er Ben Psul B'Yitziyasun. And that other bira on Harabayis, if the Parim Sofim, Sirim Sofim became pasul once they already left the Azara, so then they would be burnt at that bira on Harabayis. And when everything was done properly with the Parim Sofim, Sirim Sofim, they would be taken outside of Yerushalayim and burnt there. One question that I'm not clear about is when you have where's the Trumas Hadeshin? Was like this Beis Hadeshin in the Azara, was this like next to the Kevesh? Like was this like where they would do Trumas Hadeshin? Right, we talked about by Ola Sa'of. That would be done on the southeastern corner of the Mizbeach, so it was right next to the Beis Hadeshin. So that the innards and stuff could be thrown in the Beis Hadeshin. Is this what it was talking about, or it's unclear to me? I tried to poke around in the Rambam. I didn't see it. It's not clear to me that it's the same thing. This sounds like it might be something else. Which means that what? There's an additional Beis Hadeshin, but that is called the Beis Hadeshin. I don't know. I'm not actually sure about that right now. And finally, the Gemara discusses whether there is linah for the Parim on Nisrafim and the Sirim on Nisrafim. If you have a cow that needs to be taken out of Yerushalayim to be burnt, what if it stays overnight in the Azar? They haven't yet taken it out of Yerushalayim to be burnt. By the next day, is it pasul? That's the question. Rabbi Yirmiyah wants to know, linah ma'u shetol b'parim nesofim sirim nesofim. Is there the concept of linah by parim nesofim sirim nesofim if by the next day it has not yet been burnt, it's still sitting there in the Azara? So does it become pasul? Do we say ki mehanya linah when we say the concept of linah bibasar dibar achila? That's by meat which is eaten, whether eaten by the mizbeach or by people. Right? For example, if you have a murin or parts of the korbin, right, korbanos that need to be burnt on the mizbeach, if comes the morning they haven't yet been burnt on the mizbeach, they're pasul b'linah. Alternatively, we have something similar when it comes to eating the meat of korbanos. If the people haven't eaten the meat of the korbanos, it becomes noser. Right? So we have these concepts by meat that is meant to be eaten, whether by the mizbeach or by people. Aval hani dela b'nei achila ninu lo, but these korbanos are not, right, at least the meat of a sa'ir, right, parim nesofim, sirim nesofim. Of course, there's a murim that's burnt, but we're talking about the meat that's supposed to be taken outside of Yerushalayim and burnt. this is not going to be burnt on the Mizbeach. It's not going to be eaten by anybody. And therefore, it's instead it's taken out of Yerushalayim and burnt there. That's not, right, that is not what when we talk about burning on the Mizbeach and linah there, but not in the context of burning it outside of Yerushalayim. So maybe there's no linah by the Parim and Asafim, Mesirim and Asafim. Odilma, perhaps Lo Shna, maybe it makes no difference. Here also, if you leave it overnight and you didn't take it outside of Yerushalayim to burn, it'll be pasul b'lina. Who knows? Amar Rava says, Rava, Hamilsa Ibayale la Abaye. Taka, this question, Abaye asked this question as well. Is there lina by Parim and Asafim, Mesirim and Asafim, or not? Ufashatna Leina answered for him, Meha, from the following. There's a machlaikes about if there is pigul by chatases hapnimios. There is a machlokes about is there pigul when it comes to parim nesafim, mesirim nesafim. Now, even though there is a machlokes, nonetheless, v'shavin, everyone agrees, however, that she'im chishev ba'achilas parim u'v'sreifasan shlo asoklum. I'll tell you this much, so everyone agrees that if a person slaughters parim nesafim, let's say, with the intention to eat it, I don't know, tomorrow or something, that's not pigul, because these korbanos aren't eaten, they're burned. And if they had intention to, burn it tomorrow or whatever, it's also not pigul. Because pigul is about achilas adam or achilas mizbeach, not burning outside of Yerushalayim, not eating a korban that's not supposed to be eaten. The machlekes by if there's pigul by chatases hapnimios, if you had intention when you slaughtered it to burn the emurim, which actually are burnt to the mizbech chutz zman, there's a machlekes there. But if the intention was about burning it outside of Yerushalayim at some improper time, or eating it when you're not actually supposed to eat it outside of its proper time, which there is no proper time to eat it because you're not supposed to eat it. Anyways, everyone agrees there that there's no pigul. So my love, let's say midemachshave lo pasla. So let's say that since there's no pigul when it comes to the meat of the parim nesafim, mesirim nesafim, linah namilo, there's also linah namilo pasla. So there's also not going to be a pasul of linah by the meat of parim nesafim, mesirim nesafim. V'dilma machshava udilo pasla ava linah pasla. Let's not assume that. I can easily argue that there's no pigul, but there is linah. And how are you going to stop me from making that argument? That once they have been set aside to be a parim nesafim or a sir nesafim, there's me'ilah. If you get benefit from them, there's me'ilah. Nishchatu, once they are slaughtered, Sruli pasul b'tvuyom v'chusum kippurim v'lina. And once they are slaughtered, they can now become tameh. If a tvuyom or mechusum kippurim touches them, they'll become pasul. Uvelina, is somebody outside my house? Why would somebody go outside my house? I don't know. If uvelina, and it will also be pasul, belina, my love, lina's basar. Is this not what we're talking about? That if the meat of the parim nesafim, mesirim nesafim is just left there. Is somebody calling me? Why is somebody calling me? There's somebody outside my house. That's hilarious. Why would somebody come to my house? They're trying to call me. That's so funny. Sorry, I'm recording. I'm kind of glad I'm recording. I didn't have to answer. I mean, I wouldn't have necessarily answered anyways. I would have peeked out to see who it was and decided. Akoponim. So we see that linah is a thing by the parim nesafim, usirim anesrafim. We see that linah is a thing by parim nesafim, usirim anesrafim. So is it not talking about the meat of the korban? That right, the meat, if it's left overnight and not taken outside of Yerushalayim, lo linas emurin. No, the emurin, the parts of the korban that actually have to be burnt on the mizbeach. If they're left overnight, then they're pasul. V'amdiktani seifa kulon me'alin boen bebeis adeshin ashuta chabaser. That we just quoted a Mishnah from Me'ilah. Now, at the end of that Mishnah from Me'ilah, now I'm a little distracted by those people who came. Anyways, the end of that Mishnah, Me'ilah says, "Kulam mo'alim boyen bebeis hadeshin at yutach habaser," that by the parim nesafim, mesirim nesafim, there could be me'ila, until they are properly burnt but outside of Yerushalayim. So the seifa basar, so that's clearly talking about the meat. So reishanami basar. So let's say that the linah question is also talking about the meat of the animal. Midi iria seifa basar reisha emur. We say no. When it talks about being taken outside of Yerushalayim and burnt there and me'ila until that point, that's talking about the meat. But when it talks about linah, it's not talking about the meat. It's talking about the emur. Tashmaka menir detani Levi, that Levi taught she'ir bain pasul b'yitzi asan. Levi talks about, right, we had learned earlier that if a pasul happens when it was on its way out, so then it would be burnt by the bira. So my lab, what's on its way out? Linah, is it not talking about linah lo, pasul tuma, pasul yitzia? It's talking about it became tameh or it became pasul b'yotze. So anyways, it's not talking about linah. We have no, so it's inconclusive. We can't prove one way or another whether there is linah for parim and asafim, usirim and asafim. Friends, shkoyach, you did it. I think that ended up being a long daf. I'm not really so surprised, but hopefully I'll be able to get this edited and uploaded before Shabbos. And Daf Kuf Dalet of Masechta Zevachim, we learned, there's only Kuf Chaf is where Masechta Zevachim ends. 2 more weeks. I guess we'll be finishing on an Erev Shabbos. Oh, that's nice. That's good to have the last Daf of Masechta on Erev Shabbos because it's a smaller Daf. Doesn't necessarily mean it's easier. We discussed Kohens receiving hides of pasul korbins, right? Can a Kohen receive the hide of a korbin that became pasul? Rebbe says, well, it depends if the animal was flayed. What just went out? A little light went out. Wow, I must have been doing a lot of recording today if my light just died. So Rebbe says it depends if the animal was flayed. I'm super distracted. People knocking on my doors, lights going out. Anyways, if the animal was flayed at pasul time, so then once there's Zerikas hadam, the Kohen would get the hide. If it was unflayed at the time of pasul time, if the skin was connected, then the Kohen would not get the hide. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon says it depends if the blood if dam was already zrikad at the time of pasul time, right? At pasul time, if it became pasul prior to Zerikas hadam, well then it became pasul prior to Zerikas hadam. So then the Kohen does not get the hide. If Zerikas hadam was already done properly, then the Kohen does get the hide, even if it's still connected to the animal. You would just flay the animal and give the hide to the Kohen if it was after Zerikas hadam. Zerikas hadam for pasul korbins. Rabbi Yeshua says no meat, no blood, no meat. Rabbi Elazar says so actually you can have Zerikas hadam even when there is no meat. We discussed Hanina Sgan Hakohanim, who said that he had never saw a hide being taken out to be burnt. We had said that means that even if, like, you had a korbin that was brought to that after the skinning of the korbin, it turned out that it was a treifa. We said the hide could still go to the Kohanim. Rabbi Akiva then extended that to a Kohen who there was a mum on a bechor and he slaughtered the bechor, and it turns out it was a treifa. That hide is also, Rabbi Akiva said that the Kohen can keep that hide as well. We discussed burning inner chatases. We said when a pasul happens right in the azara, so then it's burnt in the azara. If it happened when it was leaving the azara, so it would be burnt at bira, which was a place on Har HaBayis. We're talking machlokas Rabbi Rosh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, if it's a specific place in Har HaBayis or if it's anywhere on Har HaBayis. All of Har HaBayis is called the bira. We discussed the base, right, and then the parim and asafim, serum and asafim, when they are properly, when everything's done properly and they're taken outside of Yerushalayim, so then they are burnt outside of Yerushalayim in the Beis HaDeshen. And then we discussed whether there is linah for inner chatases or not, and that was kind of inconclusive. Friends, I hope you enjoyed Daf Kuf Dalet of Masechta Zevachim. Cheers!